So Kyle saw a white ibis in Payne Park. Philippa Randall from England, great. A long-tailed tit. Margie saw swallowtail kites in Lakewood Ranch. All right. Joy Sebal also saw a swallowtail kite. I saw a pair of them on the Manatee River in downtown Bradenton on Sunday. Pam Koff in Sarasota saw a hairy woodpecker. Nice. Frank Blum at Lemon Creek Wildflower Preserve saw a brown thrasher. Jean saw a swallow-tailed kite in the meadows. They're here. Rebecca Lees in Venice saw a red-shouldered hawk in Grand Palm. All right. John Cavallero from White Plains, New York. All right. Fully vaccinated and looking forward to being in Sarasota next winter. We're looking forward to having everyone back. I hope it works, and I think by next winter, everyone else will be vaccinated as well. Okay, so we have 50 people on at this point. So let's see. Oops, I keep doing that. Sorry about that. Jane Paisley in Pelican Cove. All right. Sorry, I don't know. YNCH, Jean? YCNH. Yellow crowned night heron. All right. Nesting at Pelican Cove. Got it. Barbara Males and Osprey saw swallowtail kites at Mission Valley Golf Course. Okay. Cool. All right, it's 7:01. So we're going to give folks another minute or so, and then we'll get started. Alicia saw a yellow-bellied sapsucker. Cool, in Sarasota. He was so absorbed, he let her get close. Nice. Debbie Blanco saw swallowtail kite in Carlton Preserve and Reserve in Northport last week. Yeah, this is a fun time of year, isn't it? All right, so we'll get started. I just want to give you guys a bit of a background for those of you who might be new to our Zoom webinars. You will not be seen, but we can, any logistics or questions that are not related to the speaker, please feel free to put in the chat and I will answer them. If you have a question for the speaker, which we'll use at the end, please put those in the Q&A. So you have two options for typing, and the Q&A is questions for the speaker, and that just gives us a way to keep track of the questions. So it's a little easier for us if you use the Q&A. So we appreciate that. So in that way, you can also put your question at any time while he's talking, and it'll be there when we start asking at the end. So Jean will give a short business meeting, and we will get started. So I will stop sharing and so you can see Jean. And if you want to put your view on speaker view, you can. You'll see just Jean, or we've got all of us here.
Okay. Hi, everybody. It's wonderful to see you. Thanks for coming. Thanks for joining us again. These monthly meetings and these Zoom presentations are keeping us all going and keeping us all connected, and it's absolutely wonderful that you're joining us today. My name is Jean Doobie. I'm the president of Sarasota Audubon Society. I'll give you a few little items of business, one of which is COVID. There is no change in how we see and how we feel we can operate. The Nature Center is still closed. Most, all field trips and activities are closed down. There are a few brave and hardy bird naturalists out on the boardwalks from time to time. So I hope they're vaccinated and taking care of themselves. The quad, I'll just give you a short update on the quad. The members of our conservation committee are working with the Conservation Foundation, as you know, on the process of finding an engineering company, a design firm, and for an owner's representative who will help Sarasota Audubon shepherd this project through to its completion. And by the end of this month, we hope to share with you the results of that selection process. So things are moving. In the screen before, Karen had shown that their nominations for elected officers are due. We do that at the April meeting. So at that meeting, we announced the slate for those who will stand for election for SAS officers. And those are president, first vice president, second vice president, treasurer, and secretary. Our nominating committee members are Karen Schneider, Don Schneider, and Glynis Thomas. And if you'd like to nominate someone for one of those positions, please submit their name before April the 5th to info@sarasotaAudubon.org. And we will forward the name to the committee members. If you know the committee members directly, you can contact them. And after is the next meeting, I believe, is it's the April 12th meeting. I'm sorry. So you can get the names in by April the 12th. And we will be doing an e-vote via SurveyMonkey or Zoom. I can't remember which one we did last year, but it'll be an electronic vote, and you'll get a link after the next meeting. And please respond to the slate, yay, nay, or a nominee of your choice. Members, have you paid your dues? I know we keep bashing away at this, but our members are our lifeblood, and as you know, we haven't been able to have any substantial income at all this year from any of our marvelous programs. So it would be great if you would it's only $30 a year, and we've been really working hard to keep this year going and alive for you guys. So if you could help us, that would be wonderful. And now I've got some really fab news. Sarasota Audubon is collaborating with Unidos now. They're a local Latino Hispanic organization, and we will be conducting family field trips for them. Their mission is to integrate families into the larger community. In preparation for those trips, we have translated one of our beginning PowerPoint presentations into Spanish, and we purchased Ken Kaufman's field trips that he's got a Spanish translation, and we purchased some of those that we can use on those field trips. And Unidos now will provide a bilingual intern for the field. Some of the family members will be speaking, will be more comfortable in Spanish, especially the older folks, so that will help them. We've got 2 scheduled trips so far, one to Phelps Preserve in Palmetto in April, and the other to the celery fields in May. We've submitted a grant to help fund these translations and field trips, so we're hoping that that'll come through. We are planning 1 trip a month starting next September. And if there are any Spanish speakers among our members who would like to assist on these field trips, please let us know. We're really thrilled that we're reaching out in a more diverse way, and we're hoping that these will be successful, and we're very excited about it. Karen will be overseeing and managing those trips. So that's all I have to say. That's all the business news. So go ahead and enjoy the program. I don't know who's next. Is it back to you, Karen, or to Margie?
Margie, I believe.
Okay, all right. Okay, Margie, it's yours.
Hi, everyone. So I am thrilled to welcome Ken Meyer, who is the Executive Director of the Aviation Research and Conservation Institute. I'm thrilled to welcome him back to Sarasota, Audubon. He's been speaking with us in the past, as you may recall, and it's always nice to hear his updates on the birds that are of special concern to RCI, as it's abbreviated. So Ken is going to talk about tracking data drives. Tracking data. The subject is, according to what we sent you all, tracking data drives habitat management and conservation for imperiled Florida birds. And I understand from seeing the beginning of Ken's presentation that he has a much more interesting title. And I also just want to say that Gina Kent will not be with us tonight because I understand she's following some important birds as they come over, and I'm sure Kim will tell us more about that. Let me give you a little bit of background about Dr. Meyer. Dr. Ken Meyer received his Bachelor's of Science in Zoology from the University of Maine and his PhD in Zoology by Behavioral Ecology from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He's studied the conservation biology of birds in Florida and beyond since the 1980s, beginning with his research on swallowtail kites, which continues to this day. And I'd like to say, I think he's probably the world expert on swallowtail kites. No doubt about that. After serving as a postdoc associate and then research associate at the University of Florida from 1988 to 1992, he conducted studies of red cockaded woodpeckers and the bird communities of South Florida pinelands for the National Park Service and Big Cypress National Preserve and Everglades National Park. In 1997, he co-founded RCI and soon branched out into other research challenges on a broader range of species. And he served on species status review committees for state agencies and biological review panels for the National Wildlife Refuges. He received a Partners in Flight Research Award for his contributions to bird conservation. He talks all over about the concerns that we all have to know more about and conserve endangered and well, just any kind of endangered species of birds here in Florida and in, I think, the Southwest United States. He presents many programs each year to citizen conservation groups on RCI's research and its implications for bird conservation. So thank you so much, Ken, for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Marty. It's very kind. Thank you all for having me and for showing up virtually. Should we share screen? How would that be? Let's see. Karen, if you nod, I'll know that looks okay. Here we go. Yes, imperiled birds are our specialty, whether they, excuse me, whether they are formally listed as threatened or endangered by the federal government. In fact, most of the birds that we study are not listed as endangered or threatened, but in fact, they are indeed imperiled. Smaller populations, declining populations, unexplained declines, imposing threats that are only worsening. All the reasons why we should be very concerned about them. So ARCI's mission is to collect the data, collect robust data on behavior and ecology that will inform management and conservation of these species. Species that are not formally listed as endangered or threatened do not really receive much funding at all from the federal or state governments. So while that makes for a challenging business model, studying non-listed species, that's where our heads and our hearts are at. we right now, being myself and Gina Kent, we're the only full-time permanent employees of ARCI, but we have a large number of people who help us out, work with us part-time on various projects. There have been many of them over the years, and that's how we are now streamlining the organization financially to accommodate the reality that federal and state money has almost dried up for non-governmental organizations, nonprofits in general, not just biology and conservation. And philanthropy has gone that same route, unfortunately. So thanks for coming out to listen to what we have to say about this work. If it strikes a chord, come to our website, learn more, give us a call, tell us what you're interested in, see if we can help you learn more. And if you're so moved and can, we always appreciate contributions, which are tax deductible. I'm going to move on to the first species. I'm going to tell you some things about our work on snail kites. This work started in 2007. And like all the projects that we do, we look for questions that have been unanswered. Now, the snail kite is federally endangered, by the way. We also study crested caracaras, which are federally listed in Florida as threatened, the Florida population. So this is an exception to our rule that most of the species we work with are not listed. The snail kite US population is limited to peninsular Florida. That's it. Their range expanded from Lake Toho to Hopekalaga, just south of the town of Kissimmee. In the last few years, 4 or 5 years, it expanded from there all the way up to Paynes Prairie in Gainesville. So now the northern limit of the snail kite population is quite a bit farther north than it was. And of course, the southern limit is the Everglades. The birds essentially do not occur in the Keys, some in Key Largo. They occur in Cuba and elsewhere in Latin America, but there's no indication that they migrate between Florida and those countries. So we have what is effectively an isolated population. We might have the occasional bird that gets blown off course or just strikes out across the Straits of Florida and makes it to Cuba and perhaps makes it to the Yucatan Peninsula. That over the millennia, that's probably happened. So there might be some gene flow, but essentially the US population is an almost closed population. Gina Kent was listed as a co-author on this talk. Gina is probably still folding up nets in the field. We were working together the last few days on the Kissimmee River restoration area where the South Florida Water Management and the Army Corps are putting water back into the original channel of the Kissimmee River and filling in the canal. It's almost done. Our charge there is to radio track, remote track, either by satellite or cell phone, wading birds that are going to repopulate the floodplain. And if you want to feel good about something happening in conservation on a very, very large, serious and challenging scale, that's something to keep track of. You can look on Google Earth and you can see the old channel and the canal. That's a 2017 image. And you can look for more recent aerial imagery and you can see what it looks like now. So that's where Gina is. She sends her regrets, but she's involved in all the work that I'm going to be talking about in the next, I'll say a few minutes so you don't think I'm going to keep you here all night. Let's go through snail kites. As with everything we do, we try to address questions that were not being addressed. And in the case of the snail kite, there had not been any telemetry work of any kind, old-fashioned radio tracking or satellite or cell phone for quite a long time. And the recovery effort, as it was seen by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, was criticized for that. And so we started doing that. And we learned some things that I think people were not aware of, or we reinforced some informed conjecture, very highly informed conjecture by a prior researcher, Rob Bennett, who got his graduate degree at the University of Florida, studying snail kite biology. And I'll tell you more about that, his conclusions and ours, which basically support his. in a few minutes. But this is the distribution of blue-gray, the gray areas, the hatched-in areas, not in the Caribbean except in Cuba, and then the northern coast of South America. So why are they endangered in Florida? They have a specialized diet. They eat mostly apple snails. There's a native Florida apple snail, but now we also have, as I'm sure you probably know, at least 3 species really, but 2 that are most numerous of exotic Pomacia snails. So Pomacia pallidosa is the native apple snail. And then we have some exotic invasive, basically aquarium snails that got on the loose and population explosions that in fact have probably saved the snail kite from extinction in Florida. But that's kind of a dicey status, because here we are this bird is relying on an exotic invasive species that otherwise it would be preferable to control them and limit their expansion. They're not yet displacing native apple snails, but that's something that we are looking at. So ARCI actually has a federal contract to be monitoring apple snails in South Florida, and we hope that that'll expand to more of the range soon. We took that over from a fellow named Phil Darby. I'll tell you more about that in a minute, but why are they endangered? The specialized diet, apple snails, and to a small extent, crayfish. Hydrology, so that's the management of water, how much water is in any given place and when is it there. That's all been altered in Florida, as I'm sure you are aware, starting with when the Everglades were drained and channelized and agriculture expanded south of Lake Okeechobee, mostly sugar production, but there's all kinds. And then water quality, of course, fertilizer nutrifies water, which in turn grows a lot more algae and native and exotic plants that can then become invasive. So overall and in general, the snail kite's endangered because of conflicts with agricultural and urban demands for water. And in some specialized cases, demands by other species that are also of great conservation concern, such as the Cape Sable seaside sparrow. So as I mentioned, we do an apple snail monitoring project that Phil Darby, who had started this 9 years ago, turned over to us to manage in the day-to-day. He still works with us. Phil knows everything there is to know just about apple snails. You can see the egg clusters on the left, both kinds on one stem. The small pink ones are the exotics, 10 times more numerous, more robust in the face of drying conditions and flooding conditions. You would think they would rapidly outcompete and outpopulate native apple snails, but the story's not over yet. It didn't look like that was happening at first, miraculously, but there are indications lately that that might be what's coming. This picture here is really beautiful snail kite habitat. Those emergent spike rushes, genus Eleocharis mostly, or Panicum, those are the stems that the snails come up to breathe, to come up to the surface to breathe. Then they drop off and go back to the bottom. But while they are up on those stems, that's when they're vulnerable to snail kites, who are extraordinarily well adapted at finding them by coursing over habitat like this, seeing them on those emergent stems of vegetation and snatching them, going to a perch, using that long hooked bill to extract the meat from the shell and gobbling them down, taking them back to their nests, feeding their young. Here's a couple of our crew members out in Conservation Area 3A, just north of the Everglades, north of Tamiami Trail, where we've been doing most of the apple snail sampling now for the last 4 years. And we hope that that continues. It's been terrible snail conditions there for the last year. Virtually no snail kite nests in Conservation Area 3A, whereas back in the mid to late 90s, the bird was very well studied in this very same area. It was in fact the center of abundance for the snail kite in the United States. But as water regimes were changed with the advent of Everglades restoration, trying to get hydrology, at least in some places, back to the originally natural conditions, that actually has jeopardized the snail kite as we're trying to restore the Everglades and some other species, such as the Cape Sable seaside sparrow, which is federally endangered and very close to extinction. So what happened was when we replumbed, when we made over all the plumbing in the Everglades, drained it, made agriculture possible, especially big sugar, we displaced these species from places they were very well adapted to, but they found refugia where they could survive in smaller numbers and continue to reproduce, but precariously. Now that we're restoring the Everglades, we are displacing them from those places that they moved to, where they found conditions that still met their need on a smaller scale. So it's nobody's fault that this is happening. We're trying to do a good thing by restoring the Everglades, but in the process of doing this, we are now threatening snail kites and other species. One of the projects we're doing is a collaboration with the University of Florida team led by Dr. Robert Fletcher. UF for many years now has been responsible for doing the snail kite monitoring. And it's a very finely crafted, intricate monitoring program that's quite effective, but it's very expensive to do it on the large scale that's needed. And that's why we started doing telemetry, because none of it was done. But gradually UF started doing telemetry as well. So they invited us to collaborate on a telemetry project together. And then we also brought our experience sampling apple snail densities to the equation. And I just had a meeting driving up from fieldwork down south today. We had a meeting talking about what will be our first publication out of this particular project. So this is a gratifying thing to be involved in. And but what we've been doing on our own now since 2007 is remote tracking. So this is telemetry with either satellite or cell phone data collection. GPS receivers on board, just like the one in your phone or in your car, that help you map and find places, tell you exactly where you are. These little devices that we put on snail kites. Here's Gina doing one in this lower left picture, solar powered. The GPS function provides highly accurate location data to within 10 or 15 meters every 2 hours, every day. And it gets uploaded either to cell phone towers or to satellites. And then that movement information answers questions about where birds are nesting, how site faithful they are to those places, how much area do they need to forage, how much of the state do they cover. I'll show you some of the things that we learned. In the lower right here, this is a picture of Gina out in a kayak with a trap that we developed to catch snail kites. We use for bait, I'll let you guess, snails. Yeah, so this PVC square has a sling, a sagging black window screen mesh below it in which we put the snails, which do try to run away. We've made little devices where we can connect some fishing line to their shell, little leashes to keep them in the trap. They don't get taken by the snail kites. When the kites come down to try to catch them, you can't really see in the picture, but there's some little monofilament nooses that stick up on the top, across the top of that trap, and their toes get caught. It's a very, very safe trap. We've never injured a kite. The radio tracking or tagging goes very quickly and we release them. And so the kind of data we collect, the map on the left shows the places where we have tagged snail kites in Florida, 31 adults. This is very expensive work. We add a few every year or two. We've been tracked since 2007, producing that map on the right. And here's one of the most important things, perhaps the most important, that we learned from this tracking study. This map on the left, each color is a different individual snail kite. The red hatching indicates the places where snail kites are managed and monitored. These are the traditional wetlands, like around Lake Okeechobee, the Everglades, the Kissimmee chain of lakes. What we determined by looking at individual birds tracked, here's a map of a male, for instance, the blue dots are the non-breeding season, the red are the breeding season. For 1 year, for a male, here's another male for a year, same thing, breeding and non-breeding. What we learned was well over half of the GPS locations we've been collecting since 2007 remote tracking locations, not always GPS initially. Over half, well over half, have been outside of those areas where monitoring and management has been focused. This is not anybody's fault. People were not aware of how widely these birds were ranging. And what we determined is that they're moving a lot, and they move very rapidly. They cover large distances very quickly. This is just the 9 birds we have tagged in the last year. There's a list of them there showing the places where we tagged them, anywhere from Paynes Prairie down to Lake Toho and Lake East Toho, Tohopekalaga, Loxahatchee Slough, Winding Waters, same general area. And these are the tracks of those birds just within actually less than a year. You can see how much they essentially cover the entire range of Florida. Rob Bennett, whom I mentioned, one of my heroes for sure. He did such an amazing job studying this bird, and then he left Florida. Doing work on snail kites is fraught with lots of complications. There are conflicting issues politically, financially, professionally. That's one short phrase that sums up a very, very long bunch of stories, but we've stuck with it. We're still trying to do this work, trying to find the funding to do it. But these are the things that we learned that were most important. As Rob Bennett's put it, yeah, the snail kites have, they're site faithful. They're site faithful to their entire US range, 2/3 of the peninsula of Florida. And I'll tell you that in some of these really long distance moves, these are made in the course of a single day, that kind of a distance there. And the kites will, what Rob thought they're doing is and we agree, they're investigating other wetlands to see if they're productive, if there are enough snails there. And Rob's suggestion actually was that they leave where they are when they're in good condition, not when they're starving, because when they're in good condition, they really can go explore. Breeding season's over, the kids are out, they're on their way to high school at 9 months old, essentially. And that's the time when the adults can go up and down the state and see where it's hot and where it's not, store that knowledge. I won't show the picture, but we have a set of maps for one individual female that we tagged, that UF provided nesting data for that bird, and nested in 5 different years in 4 different places over a latitudinal range from here down to here, 180 miles. It was not site faithful to a single place at all. It nested in one place for 2 years out of 5, and the rest of the time it was in 4 other places, or 3 other places rather. I'm sorry. So they take advantage of that knowledge they gain by traveling around. We measured mercury, total mercury, in apple snails, but in snail kites, we measured total mercury. Methyl mercury is the biologically dangerous form. And so this is an ongoing study. We've teamed up with a grad student, Jennifer Bouchonneau at the University of Central Florida, who's just finished her master's work on raptor toxicology in Florida. And we're going to be working together on snail kites. This is going to be a big part of her dissertation research. And Jenny has very graciously been helping raise money so that we can measure methyl mercury, not just total mercury, and get a much better idea of what the impacts might be of the mercury levels in snail kites. Down here in the south, where mercury is most prevalent, and methyl mercury conversion to methyl mercury is most prevalent as well. In the Everglades, this is where we have the highest levels in parts per million. These levels in other species of birds can cause reductions in breeding of up to 30% in nesting success. This has never been pursued by anybody. In fact, there's a lot of resistance to this work, and that's why it's been hard for us to answer the second question. That's a long story in itself, but it's not our idea of how endangered species recovery should function, but unfortunately that's been the case. I'll leave it at that for the moment. These are the movements from our collaborative study from US for one juvenile, just one bird that was tagged in Palm Beach County, Grassy Waters. And this is essentially a year. And as you can see, The young birds cover a huge amount of area as well. In fact, they seem to move even more frequently than adults, and they go east to west as well. This is in their first few months of life, the first year of life. And what it suggests to us is that they are mapping the landscape. They are learning where snail kites nest in Florida, and they are figuring out where they might be able to go to find conditions to nest in any given year. And the one thing we've learned is you cannot count on the conditions being good in the same place from one year to the next. That's a key point. To wrap up the snail kites, I just want to tell you a few things that we're trying to do. We can wait for agencies to take our management recommendations, to take Rob Bennett's and Rob Fletcher's and et cetera. We can wait for agencies to do that and to get those management recommendations applied when it comes to hydrology. But what we have found is a more direct way to do that is work with land managers individually who share our passion about bird conservation and about data-driven bird conservation. One example is working with the Palm Beach County Zoo and the Palm Beach County Environmental Resource Management people to track birds on their conservation areas in Loxahatchee Slough. And this has been very rewarding for us and very informative to the people managing Loxahatchee Slough, the county biologists, Melissa Talbert, David Woodmill. What these folks are doing now is taking this information we're giving them about the kites on their management areas, and they are saying to the water management district, we have an endangered species here. If we're going to manage it well and support the nesting, which actually last summer was the highest number of nests on any management unit in the whole state. I believe Paynes Prairie and Lake Toho were second and third. So they are now going to the water management district and saying, during these months, we need this much water on the landscape if the public wants us to help save snail kites. Another project, I mentioned the Kissimmee one, I didn't mention, this is where we were trapping wading birds the last few days, and where Gina still is. This is the Kissimmee River Restoration Area. Lake Istopoga, Lake Okeechobee's down here. Kissimmee River Ditch, the canal that was dug to speed the flow of water. Well, for the last 20 years, this big project has been filling in that canal, and water is now back into the original historic channel. And within a few months, this whole area, the final grading is going to be going on. Mike Cheek, a biologist with South Florida Water Management, came to us and asked if we could help them by conducting a wading bird study to document their use, document the use of wading birds using the restoration floodplain as it unfolds, as it floods. And since we already had snail kite data of our own, 5 of 9 adult snail kites that I mentioned that we've tagged in the last year, these colored dots represent locations of those 5. More than half of the birds, essentially, that we've tagged this year are using the restoration area. And they come from all over. I mentioned Paynes Prairie, all the way down to Palm Beach County is where we tag these birds. Simultaneously, from our collaboration with the University of Florida team, 11 out of 25 juveniles that we tagged and tracked. Carolyn Poley, by the way, is the PhD student who did all the field work for this project. And she recently became Dr. Poley. Our thanks to her and to Rob Fletcher for this collaboration. So 11 of the 25 juveniles that we have tracking data for, same thing, occupying that area. This information is golden to land managers. And the way for us to deliver it is not to put it in reports, we have learned, the closer I've gotten to retirement, which probably I will never do. This is a big part of our job, considering all the species that we study. How to get this information into the hands of the managers who are passionate about doing it. These people are farming public resources for us on public lands, and they take all the pride and all the pleasure that farmers do in growing good crops. It's I wish I had figured this out earlier in my career, but it's always been one of my favorite things to do. So in a nutshell, we need a network of wetlands to sustain the US population of snail kites. It is the whole range that we have to look at, because at any given time, from Paynes Ferry down to the Everglades, a certain number of acres, we don't know what that is. That will take some fancy modeling, but a certain number of acres must be producing a sufficient number of snails to support reproduction by snail kites. Simple as that. If we want to have 1,000 pairs of snail kites, we need X number of acres productive in any given year. And the next year, that same number of acres if we want to keep 1,000 pairs of snail kites on the landscape, but they're going to be different acres. Some will be the same as the year before, some will be different. This is a monumental, a very, very challenging task, but it is not beyond us. We need to start doing bold things because this bird almost went extinct until the exotic apple snail came on the scene, to put it mildly, and it expanded very, very rapidly. So this is just a reminder here. I'll finish snail kites. I'll move on to reddish egrets real quickly. Just a reminder, we have different citizen science programs. You can report any sightings of any of the birds that we're interested in. They're on our website. We have a site on our site where you can report sightings. If you have a particular interest in a bird and want some help in what kind of information might be useful to researchers, ourselves and others, we can help you out with that. So this is thanks just for the snail kite work. This is not the end of the talk. Don't run to the refrigerator yet. Or run to the refrigerator, turn your camera off and go wherever you want. But come back, because now we're going to talk about reddish egrets. I just want you to notice, though, all the agencies and groups, and particularly across the bottom, we've got Fish and Wildlife Service, USGS. Those are the federal agencies. But look at this. Alachua Audubon, Palm Beach County, Palm Beach Zoo, St. Petersburg Audubon, Alligator Farm. These Audubon chapters have been supporting us tagging snail kites around Florida, especially in the case of Alachua Audubon on Payne's Prairie, and St. Petersburg Audubon also tagging swallowtail kites and short-tailed hawks. Palm Beach Zoo is a major funder for us right now on snail kites. Reddish egrets, started studying them in 2004, sort of, especially in 2009, in the Florida Keys and then at Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge. They come in 2 color morphs, they eat fish, they're vulnerable, incredibly vulnerable to climate change, sea level rise, changing water chemistry as a result of climate change. And they have very, very specialized foraging habitat, which I'll tell you a little bit about. But the gray and the purple, different degrees of density of sightings, that's the distribution basically of reddish egrets. They do get into the Caribbean, particularly Cuba, Mexico. They are the different degrees. Big population in Texas, 1,500 pairs. That's not very many. That's the largest US population. 350 to 400 pairs in Florida. That is it, and declining. So foraging habitat, distinctive and limited, just the physical nature of it. Shallow, hard bottom, clear water, being replenished usually on tidal changes. The reddish egret and the great white heron are 2 species of wading birds that really rely on marine, that is saltwater environments. We're not really sure, but that we know that the population is at best tenuously stable, and indications are that it is declining. Is it increasing on Florida's Atlantic coast? It may be. How do movements compare between the east and west coast, and how frequently do birds move across the peninsula? These are some of the things that we wanted to address by putting satellite transmitters. You can see one here on the back of this dark morph. So they occur in 2 color morphs. They don't change over their lifetime. Used to be called color phases, but they're really color types or morphs. And that's what the bird exhibits their whole lifetime. These are the nesting areas, but again, small numbers in any one of these areas. The Gulf Coast is particularly important. 350 to 450 pairs at most in Florida. Gina Kent and Amanda Powell, who did all the field work for this reddish egret project that I'll describe a few high points about. All of these colored dots, each color is a different individual that we tracked by satellite with GPS embedded in the satellite transmitters in the Florida Keys. And what we get are tracks like this. These are year-round ranges. They do not leave the Keys. Some of the females would go out to this island off of Key West, Boca Grande, and they would either nest out there or go out there in the off season. But reddish egrets do not make long migrations. We did the work in the Keys initially, but then Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge and the Ding Darling Wildlife Society, which is the Friends group, took an interest in supporting our work and invited us there. We tagged 5 reddish egrets on Ding Darling and learned that they don't go anywhere either. One of these birds, a female, would make little 3-week excursions up the West Coast, up into the Big Bend area. She did it every year, kind of vacation after raising a family. But she came back, and that's the closest any of them had to a migration, but it was only of a few weeks duration. And she went in the wrong direction, you know, for the non-breeding season, she went wrong. So more of a local movement. But what you see here on Sanibel, tagged 3 birds there, 2 birds over here on Bunch Beach. And we also monitored behavior. This is a real important aspect of reddish egret behavior. They're highly aggressive. They're very, very competitive. They defend foraging sites. And you'll see these aggressive interactions where they're trying to chase another one off of their little defended territory, some of which winds up in mortality. This was not a natural, well, it's a natural predation. It was basically homicide. This is probably a bird that was killed in one of these interactions, not by a predator. This was out on Boca Grande Key. So these fights can be very brutal and even fatal. Another really important, sad and serious cause of injury and death is, this is a white morph reddish egret on Sanibel. Amanda was called in and recovered this bird that had gotten fishing line and a big treble hook, the triple hooks of a fishing lure lodged in its body. The bird was healed at the Crow Rehab Facility on Sanibel and released, and went right back to what it was doing when it got injured. And that is, they panhandle, they find fishing folk, and they rob bait out of their buckets when people aren't looking, but they hang around and they get handouts, or they get small fish that get thrown up out of cast nets on the beach, that sort of thing. But in the course of doing that, they get ensnared in fishing line and lures that people abandon when their lure snags on something. That's a real serious cause for source of mortality for birds that eat things in the water like fish. Probably the biggest concern about it for reddish egrets is climate change and associated sea level rise. Projections, as you see here, red is not good. These are areas that are going to be inundated. This is not pie in the sky. This is science. These are real data from thousands of different sources that all converge on the same story. If anything, it is happening faster than scientists thought. And you all see the changes going on around us, and just the weather conditions alone that are causing hardship for human populations. One of the outcomes of climate change is more frequent and more severe tropical severe weather, such as hurricanes and tropical storms. This is the Everglades after one such storm. And when it washes over these marine, brackish, freshwater marine environments, fills them with salt water, turns the bottom up, they become basically dead bodies of water. This is down in the 10,000 Islands and Flamingo area, down at the tip of the state. This is what a nesting island of wading birds looked like after, oh gosh, I forget which one, 2 to 3 years ago, one of the severe storms. This happens to be the Lower Keys, but all those marks out there on the bottom, all these scars, that's from the severe high tidal action and trees and substrate being dislodged and washing out and damaging the bottom, damaging all the seagrass beds, and of course the nest trees. Another thing we've done with reddish egrets is put cameras on nests. This is something Amanda Powell handled, did a great job, and it's ongoing. What causes nest failures of reddish egrets? In these pictures, what we're seeing, it's a little hard to tell, but these are cameras that are motion triggered. The center picture is an anhinga that displaced an adult, and I believe also a young reddish egret that was about to fledge, copulated with a female in that nest. We thought they were going to go on and lay eggs, but then they just went somewhere else. But they displaced the reddish egrets. We had other cases of black rats depredating nestling or eggs. We had a case where, I don't see it here. We had a predation by a raccoon. There's a lot to be learned by putting these cameras out and seeing what's going on. The black rat problem, all refuges, oceanic, the world around has had to deal with this one in terms of bird nesting. People have gotten very good at eradicating rats, believe it or not, with controlling the populations that the birds can persist. This is one manageable source of mortality that we can address. And the Keys Refuge, it has been awesomely wonderful working with the refuges in general, national wildlife refuges. They're your property, they're your resources. And places like the Keys complex, Florida Keys, Key West, big Key Deer Refuge, Great White Heron National Wildlife Refuge, Ding Darling, Lower Swanee in terms of swallowtail kite, Lower Swanee National Wildlife Refuge. I have to tell you this, your national wildlife refuges are being pillaged by Congress. This started in 2008 and it persisted. Money has been cut more and more every year. The Florida Panther National Wildlife Refuge down in South Florida in Big Cypress, I learned a couple of weeks ago, is down to their permanent full-time staff, the biologist, and a clerical person. There is no refuge manager, there's no deputy manager, there's no exotic species manager. The biologist has no assistants. That's what's happening in our national wildlife refuges. It's horrible. It's horrible. It's hugely destructive. You know, you have to think, well, what is the mission to make these places, let them be overrun and mismanaged and unmanaged so that so they can be sold as real estate? This really has to change if we're going to keep these gems out there on the landscape, these refuges. That's truly what they are. So please, when you think about who to vote for at any level, from city and county and state to federal, think about where they stand on issues like funding conservation organizations like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Across the board, the service is getting cut, but it's the refuges that are suffering the worst. Another thing we did with Reddish Egrets was sample fish. We wanted to know where, what size fish, what species they were taking. And just that small area from Sanibel Island over to North Fort Myers Beach, when I showed you that map a while back of the 5 tracked birds, we found very, very clear differences in the fish populations that they were hunting in those 2 places. And on North Fort Myers, it's called Bunch Beach. It's great habitat, but the Reddish Egrets there are highly competitive and have exclusive hunting ranges, whereas on Sanibel, they're not so competitive and they overlap in their hunting ranges because the resource availability is much higher. Even over that just short distance, you can see from one site to the other. So yeah, it's been really good to look at just the prey as well. And some work that we were very, very happy to be able to help with donations from supporters of ARCI, 2 graduate students, PhD students at the University of Havana, Aliani Gonzalez and Ianella, whose name escapes me, I'm going to keep going, Garcia. Aliani, who you see right here, studied Reddish Egrets, and Gina went to Cuba and trained her in how to radio tag and track. And in Ianella's case, she studied the Cuban martin and has determined the wintering destination of Cuban martins, previously unknown for this endemic breeding population. So it didn't take us much. You know, we raised $22,000, all legally, to go to support what these folks were doing, and worked with their advisors, shown in this picture here, and did what we could to help. So they're wrapping up their PhD dissertations now. And I'm wrapping up Reddish Egrets, but not quite the talk, because I want to tell you a little bit about, well, keep an eye on Reddish Egrets. That's what this picture is supposed to remind me to say. They're in precarious shape. They're not listed as threatened or endangered by the federal government. They're listed by FWC as one of 26 birds of high conservation concern. The state calls them threatened. They don't have an endangered status. Their highest conservation status of Florida Fish and Wildlife is threatened. There are 26 species. There might be 27. Reddish egret is one of them. White-crowned pigeons is one. We study them as well. Southeastern American kestrels are one. We study them as well. So those are just the bird species. But the story's not over with Reddish Egrets. It's going to be a long time at the rate we're going before we have a sustainable population, because especially with climate change, we're losing that specialized habitat very quickly. It might form somewhere else, but is it going to form fast enough to replace what we're losing? So this shallow, clear water, tidal change, hard bottom where they can do their crazy foraging behavior, not a muddy organic bottom. It's those kind of physical features that are specialized, that this bird specializes on. I'm going to just say a few words, and I know Margie can tell you wonderful things and great stories about swallowtail kites. So I'm just going to steal a few minutes here to show you that we're trying to do the same kinds of citizen science things and management focused things with swallowtail kites. We've always tried to do this. Started studying them in 1988. Before ARCI was formed. We focused on nesting biology. We do very little of that anymore. We learned a lot. We have to decide where to put sparse resources. So what we've continued to do is the remote tracking by satellite and by cell phone. And there are some really important reasons for doing that. One of them is to find communal roosts, these pre-migration communal roosts that form. And I'm sure I've talked about them before. I'm sure you've heard Gina do the same. Margie's got great information about these roosts of all sizes. These are critical. These birds are getting ready to migrate over to the Yucatan Peninsula, at least 450, usually about 500 or 600 miles over open ocean. Not many raptors do that. Peregrine falcons do. Yeah, right. And swallowtail kites. Not many raptors will cross such large expanses of water. So what we discovered, this goes back to 1989, the second year I was studying swallowtails. And again, this was a tip-off from Brian Millsap, essentially the first director of the non-game wildlife program in Florida. And Brian found the first large roost in Florida that anyone knew about down on the west side of Lake Okeechobee, and it had just over 1,000 birds in it when he found it in 1987. He suggested that we take a look at it in the course of our work. I did, and he and I readily agreed this is a valuable opportunity to monitor the US population. And so what we have been doing is taking pictures like this, but systematically. And we've been doing this at 12 different sites. Let's go back here. At least 12 different sites each year. Sometimes it's a little bit more, but roost sites that have anywhere from a couple of hundred to over 4,000 individual swallowtail kites. Going out to hunt every day together, finding swarms of insects. They feed vertebrates like birds and rat snakes and tree snakes and or tree frogs and to their young, but the rest of the year, swallowtail kites gorge on flying insects. And that's what they're doing when they're in these roosts, getting ready to migrate to South America. It's a dangerous migration. They have to get across all that water. This is a wind map. They're heading for the Yucatan Peninsula right here. They're trying to make landfall there, and they usually get there anywhere from up around here, Rio Lagartos, to down here into the Siancán Biosphere Reserve. That's what migration looks like. This is a bunch of birds from the first few years of the satellite tracking. They go over Cuba, some land on Cuba, but for the most part, they just keep going. Gina actually got her master's degree studying, among other things about swallowtail kites, studying their stopover behavior. This is a phenomenon for migratory birds where they'll put down and replenish, rest, so they can make the rest of their journey. In this case, the swallowtails are recovering from this long water crossing and getting ready for another almost 5,000 miles before they reach their winter destination in South America. I wanted to tell you, this is southbound flight for, excuse me, I think it was probably 10 or 11 individuals this past July and August. We've never seen this happen before, where these three birds right here, blue, red, and purple, instead of doing the traditional route to the Yucatan Peninsula and then overland all the way down into Brazil, they got almost to the Yucatan and then went due west, and they didn't do it at the same time. we had a series of weather systems that produced easterly winds, but still, that happens every year. These birds went almost all the way over to the coast. The redbird, we thought was going to die. They only last 4 days and nights. This is what we've learned from satellite tracking. The redbird got over here a little over 3 days. And instead of pushing that last distance onto the coast of Mexico, it went all the way up here and into Houston, industrial Houston. Hung around, got out in the country, did some things on the rivers, and then gradually got its strength. It really spent a long time recovering, and then came down overland through Mexico, got back here on the traditional route, joined up with the stream, this river of kites coming down, and continued. But these two of these three birds here did not survive. They got within 15 or 20 miles of the Mexican coast. Their time ran out, 3.5, 4 days and nights. And their signal stopped. Presumably they fell into the Gulf of Mexico. We never had that happen on maybe one case where a bird got blown out into the Atlantic by an approaching hurricane. We don't usually see mortality going southbound. They leave the skinny tip of Cuba and they head for the big fat Yucatan Peninsula. So what's up with that? Is that an effect of changing weather? With climate change, we don't know. But once they get to the Yucatan, they continue down to Brazil. They used to use ranch land that looks a whole lot like South and Central Florida ranch lands, family-owned cattle ranches, right? You know, if you showed me that, I'd say, oh yeah, that's Henry County or something. You know, that's Okeechobee Plain. You know, nope, that's in state of Mato Grosso, Brazil. This is what is replacing this: the farms, the ranches. These soybean and sugarcane, massive industrial international agriculture. And so a study, an analysis of existing data is waiting to happen. We need to go back and look at all of our satellite tracking data since 1996, satellite and now cell phone, and see how the wintering destinations have changed in Brazil. Because here's what happens. The kites wind up all the way down here, a 10,000-mile round trip. If you are a poet or a painter or a writer of any kind, there is so much to think about and be inspired about by bird migration. This is just one of them. You know, some of the most inconspicuous, seemingly uninteresting, which is, I would never say that about any living thing. There are so many secrets, so many stories, so many incredible phenomena. If someone asked me today, what do you try to leave people with when you give talks like this? And it's just, God, a sense of wonder, a sense of appreciation and beauty and all the joy that this brings to life. Not to mention the fact that if all these animals go down the tubes, we're right behind them. I saw a great t-shirt in a native plant nursery recently. It was a picture of a bee. You know, it's great now. The native plant nurseries are all selling little native bee houses. There's a picture of a bee that said, if you lose us, we're taking you with us. Yep, and that's it. That's the story. So back to the kites, when they're coming north, coming all the way up, their northbound flight looks just like this until they get to the Yucatan Peninsula. I'm talking like you can see my cursor. I hope that's the case. Good. So what really happens now when they're going north, which is orange, green is southbound, when they're coming north, right now, this is happening. It's happening tonight. They stage on the tip of the Yucatan Peninsula. And as soon as they have a tailwind, they jump off and they head somewhere into this terrestrial bowl, this terrestrial safety net, and hope, in quotes, that within 4 days and nights, they're going to make landfall, because that's all their body can stand without fresh water. They are not a strong flapping bird. You can watch them glide all day, but you can't, you know, ask any human glider pilot how much time they spend gliding at night. No, you're not. It's not going to happen. You need to get lift out of thermal activity, rising thermals coming off the heated earth. The only way I can imagine they get any lift over the Gulf of Mexico is at this time of year, perhaps, and who knows really, perhaps the Gulf is warming up enough that relative to the air, there is a little bit of warm air. rising, and the kites are such efficient gliding machines that maybe they can take advantage of that. But this is the part of the migration that's the most dangerous for sure. Here's an example, this map over here. This bird left the Yucatan on a tailwind, and as often happens, the weather is very volatile. They get partway out across the Gulf, doing great. Yeah, this bird's going to check in, maybe hit Tampa, maybe the Big Bend, but no. A high pressure system came in, the weather direction reversed from the south to from the east. I'm sorry, from the west. This bird didn't continue north, it started going east. Well, that would have been great, but then the wind changed to northerly and it got pushed back. It didn't get back to Florida. It got pushed south, heading right for Cuba. And we're seeing all this play out as we get these satellite data. Heads for Cuba, we think, oh, it's going to check in, it's going to land on Cuba, everything's going to be okay. Now remember, from this distance, that bird can see land. But no, the wind changed again. And now it's heading right back toward the Yucatan Peninsula. So, okay, well, it can go back and start over again from the Yucatan. It can land, it can eat, it can drink fresh water, which it really, really needs. You know, you can eat meat to gain fat, but you can't metabolize the fat without water. And water weighs more than fat. Water is the critical resource for a migratory bird. So this bird came all the way back, almost made it to the Yucatan, caught an easterly wind and went right back out into the middle of the Gulf. 3.5 days and nights, 4 days and nights, turned in a circle, disappeared, died. After all of this, just kept trying to go north, kept looking for north. Yeah, so there you go. That's a close-up right here of the end of that bird. This, however, is what I like to leave on. I love this slide. And think about it. Just think about what this conveys. Each bird's a different color. This is northbound migration. They have their different styles. Some birds will leave here and go up to Cuba. This bird left from Venezuela and went out over the Caribbean, didn't even bother to go into Honduras or Nicaragua, just kept going, made it all the way up here, spent a little time on Cuba, not much at all. But anyway, what I really would like you to notice, each of these 5 birds, they all end, all these lines end where the bird nested the year before. No matter where they reached land, no hesitation, they immediately turned in the direction of last year's nest. In every case, in this case, the bird nested right there. This bird, this yellow bird, got caught in a low pressure system out here, did this little clockwise curlicue, stuck it out, got back on where it started in that curlicue, got back on track, followed I-75, followed Tamiami Trail, and went back to where it nested. And I'm not joking when I say that, actually. Birds will use features on the ground that they recognize. They're mapping the landscape and they reuse that information. And you know, highways are, there are also a lot of heat rising off of highways. Maybe they're getting some thermal lift off the roads. Right back, every one of these ended where they nested the year before. So people always ask, do they mate for life? We always want to know if animals mate for life, because we would like to think that others want to do it too. And well, the answer with swallowtail kites is they mate for life if it works out. If they both show up on that territory from the year before, they will usually repair, as best we can tell. Anyway, this is some of this is all our nesting data from the southeast up to somewhere in the early 2000s, and we mapped it all out for managers. Again, trying to get land managers this information. They can zoom into like a 30-meter pixel in this map and see whether they are supporting on their refuges or natural or forest, private or publicly owned. They can see whether they've got kite nesting habitat. We've been doing a lot of work with the timber companies and the Sustainable Forestry Initiative, international paper, and the American Bird Conservancy especially, to convey to timber owners what kites need. And you know what? They want to know and they want to help. And they don't necessarily want or seem to need public recognition for it. So this has been the case for a long time. We learned this a long time ago. There are ecological reasons why commercial forests that are sustainably managed are very important to swallowtail kites, because forestry is sort of a disturbance regime. It's not fire, it's not a hurricane, but it produces clear cuts or thinned forests. So you have every stage of forest on a landscape with an easy view of a swallowtail kite that's 100 feet up in the air. And they can see every ecological successional stage right there on their home range. And so what that means is a lot of biodiversity that they can take advantage of. And it mimics natural ecological conditions. We're lucky because forestry in the Southeast is a big industry. It's very productive, it's very profitable. What can you do? Well, support our mission, data-driven conservation. You can help out by citing reports. You can go to our website. You can follow us on Facebook page, leave information there, get information, call us, call me or Gina, email us, not hard to find. Tell us where you're seeing our study species on our website. You can do that. Monitor nesting behavior. Margie can tell you how to do this perfectly. Get involved. We have an Eyes on Kite program. This is on our website. We have instructions, the behaviors to look for, ways to not get too close and not disturb the birds. All of that, it's there, and we're happy to tell you even more if you are interested. Thanks to all these people on the left who collected data. These are employees. These are funding organizations over the years. I started in 1988, so that makes this, I think, year 33 or 34 with Swallowtail Kites. I thought it would be a 2-year project, so just goes to show you. And of course, thank you all very much. Thanks for your patience. Glad to answer any question or listen to your thoughts or comments. I'll turn it back over to Margie or Karen.
All right, Margie's gonna do the
Yes,
Q&A.
Thank you so much, Ken.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So Jean, did you have a question? Did you want to ask a question or make a comment first?
You're muted, Jean.
You need to unmute, Jean.
Okay. I said that I had put it into the chat, but there are other questions ahead of me. So if you want to go ahead, that's fine. Or you want me to ask my question?
Why don't you go ahead, because then we can.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's about snail kites. Ken, we've had sightings of them at the celery fields. We see them from time to time. They come and they stay a day or two and then they disappear. We do have a healthy population of limpkins, so we know there are apple snails around. But I also wonder about water levels. How critical are the water levels for the snail kites in a marshland swamp area?
That's probably the single most important physical factor. And that is because, you know, I mentioned that we monitor apple snails. What we monitor is apple snail density in places where snail kites have been and should be and could be nesting and foraging. So the trick is they only need one willow or cattail or something to build a nest in, but they need to eat a lot of snails. Water levels are critical to snail availability. We can measure density of snails all the time, but if the water is too deep and there's no emergent wetland vegetation for the snails to come up and breathe, and they stay down on the bottom and burn calories up very, very slowly, the snail kites are not going to be able to catch them, no matter how many there are. If the water is too shallow, there's not going to be enough oxygen in the water. The snails are going to die. They're going to go down into the mud, you know, and go into a resting state. But availability of food is what's critical to wildlife, and that's a composite variable. So that's the abundance and the density of the prey, but also the physical structure of the habitat that allows the predator to catch the prey. Nobody's really figured out how to figure that out. So water depth is critical, but it's not the only thing.
I'm sure, but we've actually seen people harvesting the snails in quite large numbers. We don't quite know what they do with them. They probably sell them to whoever, but we're really concerned about that. But the county doesn't have any prohibition about that. People seem to be harvesting. Have you seen that in other areas?
No, we have not seen it, nor have I heard of it in those kinds of concerning terms. So let me make a note of that, and I'll see if I can get someone to answer that question for you of can that be controlled? I don't think there's anything to say you can't do that, but education could be very helpful in this respect.
Yeah, well, we'll start watching it as well and try and help you sort of tackle that issue.
To give you an idea, yeah, thank you. Snail density, one snail per square meter of substrate in a wetland is really, really a high density for a good density for snail kites. Actually, if it's as little as 1/10 of a snail per square meter, it will support snail kites. There's not an endless amount of snails out there. So aggressive human harvesting in the littoral zone could definitely have an impact, I would say.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So Kathy Paris has a kind of related question, but maybe I should read it anyway. Sarasota's celery fields features spike rush and exotic apple snails. And she comments that we have breeding limpkins there. Snail kites are scarce, no breeding record, and only occasional sightings. Why? I mean, I think you've already covered this, but anything else you want to add?
Yeah, the ideal kite habitat has sparse stands of spike rush, different species of Iliocoris, and panicum. Key word though is sparse stands, so that the kites can get in there and catch things. I'll talk to some people about that because I've wondered about that area. Maybe for a long time there wasn't much living there at all, unfortunately, when the lake was really polluted.
It seems like
Meyer. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Excuse me.
I'll see what I can learn about that. Plenty of snails, but not nesting. I was wondering if anybody had documented nesting. I'm not hearing of any.
I wonder if, and related to these comments, the only place I've seen a snail kite is Mayaka State Park, and I'm wondering if they could get from there to celery fields.
Oh yeah, they wouldn't commute on a daily basis, but they will go pretty far. It's hard though, they need to, when they're raising young, they need to be foraging within, I would say, a mile. That would be a long way for them to have to keep carrying back snails.
Someone else asks, is there demonstrable competition between limpkins and snail kites for the snail resource?
Well, you see them threatening each other and trying to get snails from each other. Yeah. Limpkins have proliferated with the proliferation of exotic snails. They've changed some of their behaviors. Yeah, they're certainly competing. Is it having a limiting effect on snail kites? I've not heard anyone suggest that that's the case. Doesn't mean it's not. Yeah.
Maureen Dwyer wants to know if Reddish Egrets nest in celery fields. We get this question a lot, and I know you can answer it.
If you said Reddish Egrets?
Yes.
Not that I'm aware of. Are you?
Don't they have to be in salt water, or am I?
Yeah, they can be in, yes, they're coastal. They're coastal. They can be in brackish water, but they might be going to places where there's more salty water for foraging. Yeah, the answer is no. One more thing I should say about limpkins, limpkins are capable of taking much larger snails than snail kites can, so that limits their overlap on prey. But yeah, they do take the same size snails. Also.
And Laura Soul asked the same, well, you've already answered this question. Do swallowtail kites return to the same nest, or do they make a new nest every year? And even locally, I'm happy to report, as I told Ken before the session tonight, that the two nests from last year, the same kites have returned just now.
Are they returning to this? Are they frequenting the same structure, the same nest trees?
The same structure, and it's too much detail for now, but I can prove pretty much that they're the same exact kites.
Okay, yeah. They, maybe 20% of the time in South Florida and Big Cypress, or a little bit more, they would reuse nests from last year, but not if there's a lot of parasites in it. They might just go nearby. They might try to cover it up and rebuild, but yeah, anecdotally, we've seen females occupy last year's nest, and they may be just sort of scoping out the parasite situation or how well the nest seems to be, you know, the integrity of it. But yeah, that's neat. It saves them a lot of trouble if they can reuse the same structure.
Yeah, the one female yesterday looked like she was actively surveying and would she need to refurbish or not?
Mhm.
And also waiting to be, I felt, waiting to copulate with her mate in the nest.
Right.
William Mize says, when the kites return to their nesting area, well, this, I'm sorry, it's the same question. Do they ever use the same nest?
There was a question that got accidentally moved to answered. Debbie Blanco asks, have there been any downloads from Sarasota recently?
Oh, stand by. I posed that question to Gina.
And Debbie actually was responsible with RCI and Gina and with Ken for putting the transmitter on Sarasota. And I worked with Debbie to track those kites, including
mobilizing people to find nests. Hello, Debbie. Great supporter and lover of kites. Yeah, Gina did text back. October 12th was the last time we got data. So it doesn't look good. However, I will tell you that we have gone 2 or 3 months without getting data from the cell phone transmitters, which is what this is. So the bird is out of range of a tower, or there might be a malfunctioning radio where it's not doing strong enough signal to hit a tower. So we hold out hope, but it doesn't look good.
Wow, that's and there was
Thanks
another
for
kite.
asking.
Whoops. There was another kite that Carlton from Carlton Reserve that didn't make it. So that's very sad if that's the case.
Yeah, and you know, that's happened. We tagged 2 birds on Sanibel, and same thing. We, you know, did not get much data from them. It's really sad when it happens with birds from the same areas. We don't think there's a connection there, but you never know.
There is a question in the chat from Alan Gardner. Did you see any evolution of bill size as the diet changed to the exotic snails?
We did not, but UF did. They did a very good job of documenting exactly that. And yes, enlargement of the bill to take advantage of the wider range of size. And it's funny that it happened in a very short amount of time. I think with Darwin's finches and the Galapagos, he demonstrated that it was happening in very short order, measured in generation time. And I think for the snail kites, it was a comparable number of generations. So generation time is roughly the age of the average mother. So for a bird like the snail kite, you might say, oh, that's 4 or 5 years. And in the space of, I think what Rob Fletcher said was, this is published, less than 2.5 years, they saw changes. It's pretty amazing.
Wow.
They need all the help they can get. And, you know, unfortunately, we should be giving them more of it, not counting on things like extraordinary evolutionary natural selection stories to save them. But yeah, that's what a great example of natural selection.
Somebody, William Mize wants to know, from what country do exotic snails, or in what country are exotic snails indigenous?
The continent of South America, and I think the 2 most prevalent Homacea exotics are from Brazil.
So you're getting a lot of appreciative comments here. Such an informative presentation. Wonderful presentation. Thank you. And let me scroll down here.
Sorry it went on so long, and it's hard to stop. But at least you don't have to drive home.
And you're listening from the expert on all of this.
Right.
Thank you, Marty.
Thank you. Are there any other comments?
Yes, I'd like to say something. So Ken, you are always looking for donations. And so can people donate through your website?
Absolutely.
You
There's a
have a
button.
donation button there? Okay.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Jean.
Yeah, okay. Well, we would love to be able to help you.
And I would, oh, you go ahead. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just wondering, maybe next year, if we happen to snag a snail kite in the celery fields, maybe you can come along, or Gina can come along and
Oh, yeah.
start to, and we can help maybe put together a research project or something. That would be great.
Oh, we would love that. Glad to talk with you about anywhere if you have such an interest. I wanted to just tell everybody, I hope you all know that your Audubon chapter and your Audubon program people, I ask that they keep their faces on. That was me. They're not being vain, but it really helps me know that I'm talking to some people who are smiling and getting it and nodding, because I'm so used to that. I love that part of live presentations. So I'm imagining that all of you are out there, and I remember a lot of you. But a cheer to you guys for lining up. You know, you're going beyond the usual box of presenters. You can do this with international stars of all kinds, and good for you for doing that and sharing all that. Thank you.
Well,
I'll be tuning in.
There were 75 people at least.
Oh, that's good.
Just when I glanced earlier, I think we had more.
I'd just like to say again that it's really astounding, and given the cutback in funding for such important concerns like yours, Ken, yours and Gina Kent, that you're the only two people continuing this research. All of us, please, let's all try to contribute as we can. And his website is in the lower left corner. It's www.arcist, that's RCI. Well, it's actually RC like ARC, ARC inst like institute. .org. And please, it's a fun website. It's fun to track the kites that are coming back now. And thank you so much for all that you do for all of us. And I know so many of us really love swallowtail kites and the kites, snail kites, and all of the birds that you're really doing your best to take care of and make a big difference in the future of Florida birds and all birds.
Oh, thank you, Marty. Thank you. Well, it's this kind of support that means so much to us. And I mean, this support, I'm not talking just about financial by any means. This is more important. We couldn't keep doing it otherwise. So thank you very, very much.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
All
Wish
right.
I could see you all.
Okay, so Margie, tell us what's coming next. I'm gonna share my screen now.
So I am happy to say that we're having a sort of a follow-up, a good follow-up to Ken Meyer's talk today. We're going to have Melissa Abdo talk about saving the Greater Everglades ecosystem. And she is now the regional director for the Suncoast for the National Parks Conservation Association. And she grew up, and she is a personal friend, so I know a little bit more about her. She grew up in Miami and spent a great deal of time in Southeast Asia. And she's extremely concerned about the denigration, especially of big cypress swamp, and of course the Everglades. So she'll be exploring the Everglades river of grass, amazing diversity, talking about swamp life, and also, as I'm saying, the work being done to address threats to its unique ecology. So she'll be on with us in Zoom next month on April 12th.
All right, and also don't forget our Audubon Extra on March 24th. Our own Catherine Young will be showing us how to use eBird, and then not only how to use it just for the novice, but also for those more advanced. There's a lot of different depths of data that you can use and contribute to. So it's eBird for everyone. And that's coming up on the 24th of March. So, and visit our website for any more information. And I've got the arcinstitute.org. ARCI is Avian Research and Conservation Institute.org for Ken. So thank you all.
Thank you,
very much.
everyone.
Good
Good
night.
night. See you at the next one.
Bye.